Hi, I'm Ethan, and today I will be delving into the series of recommendations and decisions that were made during the crisis that impacted the Australian aviation sector. I'll take you through the motivations, the risk management concepts, and ethical implications that influenced my decisions, and I'll reflect on what could have been done differently and could be done differently if I encounter a similar situation in the future. I'll begin by discussing the decisions and recommendations that I made and my reasoning behind them. The final decision that I made for what to do was, the final decision made for what to do was to support the implementation of a tourism initiative to stimulate the demand for flights. The reasoning for this decision ultimately being made was to try and ensure that international route capable aircrew and aircraft could remain active despite the challenges introduced because of COVID-19. Although that was ultimately the decision that was chosen, I personally made the recommendation to advocate for the establishment of a federal program for pilot certification to help ensure pilots that were stood down during the pandemic were able to maintain their licenses until such time operations could resume. I decided this was the best decision because of the ultimate need to preserve the competency and readiness of the pilot workforce. I saw challenges with the tourism initiative's strategy concerning potential public criticisms and uncertain market responses. I personally decided that my recommendation was a strategic move to streamline the re-employment processes for pilots and aircrew once flight operations were able to resume. Throughout the decision-making process, I placed a significant amount of value on collaboration and open communication amongst all stakeholders. I believe that getting diverse perspectives on problems at hand can contribute to developing a more inclusive and robust strategy overall to address a threat. The reason I decided to support a federal program for pilot certification over the other alternatives rested upon several factors. Firstly was the strategic importance of maintaining the readiness and competency of aircrew and pilots during the pandemic. Second was that this approach allowed for more direct control over the outcome, whereas reopening of borders and pushing for tourism is largely dependent upon the public health conditions, negotiations, and consumer sentiment. My third reason was to do with potential longer-term economic benefits by setting up a system for getting pilots back to their duties after a downturn in flight operations. It could aid in the recovery of the aviation sector in the future more effectively if something was to happen again. Considering that the aviation industry faces shortages of staff and particularly pilots at the best of times, it is evident that the pilot workforce is one of the most valuable assets in the aviation industry. So by investing into the maintenance of pilot proficiency during the downturns, we would be effectively investing into the future of the industry. My decision was not without criticism, however. Some would probably have argued that the funds required to support a program of this nature could have been used more effectively somewhere else, especially during times of crisis with so many places to use the funds. However, I maintain my stance that the investment would have proven worthwhile in the long run. The decision I chose was strongly supported by my application of relevant risk management principles and theories, with a focus on maintaining the readiness and proficiency of the pilot workforce. This decision to support a federal program for pilot certification was based on a systematic risk identification and analysis process, recognizing that one of the most significant risks being faced was the degradation of pilot skills and competencies due to extended periods of inactivity. I deemed it necessary to address this risk to avoid shortages of pilots when travel demand returned. I adopted the concept of enterprise risk management, mapping this risk along with other potential threats to an integrated risk framework. This approach allowed me to visualize the interconnections between the risks and help me to understand what their cumulative impact on the aviation sector could be. My solution was essentially a risk mitigation strategy targeted at reducing the risk of skill degradation amongst pilots. This aligned with the key principle of a proactive approach to risk management, which is outlined in the ISO 31000 risk management standards. When assessing my options, I made use of the concept of risk evaluation to consider both the likelihood and the potential impact each of the identified risks could have. The risk of borders reopening unpredictably was deemed very high impact, but very low in likelihood because of the complex global health situation being faced due to the pandemic. On the other hand, the risk of skill degradation in pilots was deemed to be both high impact and high in likelihood, given the extended downtime many pilots were facing with COVID-19. This steered me towards a priority of addressing the skill degradation of pilots. I also employed the concept of risk transfer, but in this case, it was about shifting the financial risk from the airlines to the federal government. The proposed program would have provided funding to ensure pilots' proficiency checks could be maintained during the downturn, relieving some of the pressure from the airlines. Finally, a continuous risk monitoring process was implemented, planning regular reviews of the effectiveness of the program. This was to ensure that we would be prepared to respond to the changes in the risk environment and make necessary adjustments to the approach. This concept is a key component of the COSO Enterprise Risk Management Framework, which ensured the effectiveness of risk management strategies over time. I made sure to keep the ethics of the decisions being made at the forefront of my mind throughout the process. The primary ethical responsibility was to safeguard the long-term health and viability of the Australian aviation industry, while also aiming to respect and support the livelihoods of those working within the industry, namely the pilots and the aircrew that were stood down due to the pandemic. In deciding to address the risks being faced, it was within our ethical duty to minimize any adverse effects to the livelihoods of the people working within the sector. In choosing to set up a federal program for pilot certification, we would have been ensuring that pilots who were stood down remained current, thereby showing support to the workforce during such a difficult time, making sure they could return to work immediately. The ethical implications of this decision were not only limited to the employees in the sector alone, though. Ethical responsibility to the Australian public and to the economy was also needed to be considered. Implementing this strategy would have helped streamline the re-employment process for pilots when operations resumed, which would be crucial to the integrity of the industry, preserving jobs and the industry's capacity to contribute to the economy overall. Transparency also guided my actions. Throughout the process, I wanted to be sure that decisions were openly and honestly communicated with relevant parties, providing clear justifications and acknowledging any potential challenges of the approach chosen. There was a commitment to keeping stakeholders informed about what was happening, which I believe is essential in maintaining trust in uncertain times. Upon undertaking a thorough reflection of my actions during the crisis, I recognize that there is definitely a degree of uncertainty present in all decisions that get made, especially in a risk situation. So if I was to be faced with a similar situation again in the future, I would reconsider some things based on this experience. Firstly, I would attempt to establish a detailed contingency plan to facilitate a quicker and smoother transition from standby to active operations for pilots and large aircraft. While Solution X would have been an effective response, further refining the strategy could have better addressed the surge in demand once flight operations had resumed. We also could have put more effort into engaging with and seeking input from a broader range of stakeholders during the decision-making process. Although we did involve the key parties, expanding this circle may have allowed for more diverse perspectives and more innovative solutions. I would, however, keep some of the things I did the same. The dedication to ethical decision-making should always be present when making decisions, and despite the challenges it could have posed, Solution X was a testament to these values, I think. The adherence to risk management principles and frameworks was also crucial in navigating the crisis, and making use of the COSO Enterprise Risk Management Framework and the ISO 31000, among others, helped to identify, analyze, and manage the crisis. So just to conclude this debrief, the experience gained through this crisis has given me invaluable insight into managing risk. While I would certainly modify some strategies and some of the ways that I did things, the core principles and ethical stance taking would definitely remain the same, driving my commitment to industries and the broader community as a whole. Thank you very much for listening.